Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Adobe Live show. This week we're live from New York, and it's a special day. It's the World Interaction Design Day, and we welcome additional guests to our classic Adobe Live program, and one of them is George. I'm super happy to welcome him on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome, George.
Wonderful. It's really, really exciting to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
And we have all our friends watching from all around the world. So we're live from New York. George, actually, you live in Chicago.
That's right. I live in Chicago.
Yeah,
Our
so
office is there.
Let us know where you're from. Okay, just to I see Kathleen. It's good to see you. Munir is from Morocco. I know that. I see Tima. Yeah, so thanks for watching. We will discover the story of George. He has an amazing story to share, a personal one, that should really inspire all of us, and for all of us, because we work in the design industry, and yeah, we will talk about your journey, how to have an impact on social project, and on the community and on our users, and we will talk a lot about power. It's just a teaser, but it's super inspiring, so I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, so how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I would say that I'm a designer.
Yeah.
I am also a teacher. And
where do you teach?
I teach at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm very, very lucky to be teaching there. There's some quite remarkable students. And I'm also a dad, so those are the three biggies. Those are the three biggies.
That's also a big job.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
And because of my career having been a design consultant for so long, I feel like I'm pretty used to now doing that role. So I feel like I'm a design consultant now. It's a funny word sometimes, because I think in some circles, a design consultant or just consultant in general can feel like it's someone who makes things more complicated sometimes. And I think my job is to make things more simple. So hopefully we can do that today.
Awesome. So you have a presentation also that speaks to your journey and the big decision you made a few years ago to create your own agency. So yeah, let's maybe share your screen.
Sure.
And we'll see that. And just a heads up for people watching and joining the show, we will have a surprise for you at some point during the show. So stay focused. If you see fireworks, it will be the chat and win. So you have to type diversity, okay? The keyword is diversity in the chat, and you can get a chance to win a beautiful notebook produced by Moo, who is our partner this week. Do you know Moo.com? They do like beautiful business cards.
I think they're out of England.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Yeah, I think they're definitely, based out there. Yeah.
Like yourself.
Yes,
so.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. UK, anyone from the UK watching? From England? Yeah, let us know.
So I can start if that would be okay.
So what is this?
Yeah, so what you're looking at right now are insulin delivery devices. So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the condition of having diabetes.
I have one of my best friends actually who is using
it's. I think things have progressed a long way now. So I think at this point, if you have diabetes, a lot of delivery of insulin can be managed fairly regularly and safely through products like this. And I was very, very fortunate at one of the very beginning parts of my career, working on insulin delivery devices when I was at a global consultancy. Towards the end of the same sort of period of time there, after about 7 years of working at that same consultancy, I'm also working on projects for Kool-Aid. If I'm doing my job correctly, I'm causing behavior change, and in one case, I'm causing behavior change to help people live, I think, longer lives. And in the other case, I'm helping cause behavior change and possibly making people drink and consume enormous amounts of sugary water. And I'm not sure if you can tell, but it seems obvious to me that there is a direct conflict there.
There is a conflict.
Yes, and this is something that's, I think, present in a lot of the design industry, where there will be moments in your career where you, across the projects that you work on, where you feel conflicted. And I think it can make for a lot of challenging decisions about whether or not to say something. And I think I felt that if I did say something, it might jeopardize my career. So I felt very compromised, which I think is a very common feeling that a lot of designers have. So at least...
I see some names, like Kevin also, who is from the UK. Yeah, Kevin. And Kathleen also is saying, wow, what a combination. Yeah. And as you said, so this was during your previous life, like before creating your own agency, so you were working for this big organization, and as you said, like it could put at risk just your job, saying, I don't feel good about working on these two projects at the same time.
And what's funny is that I have the privilege to be able to give a critique of it, because I think working at a consultancy at that scale and at that caliber, you end up being a critical thinker about a lot of the projects you work on. And if you apply that same critical thinking to across your own portfolio, you start to spot perhaps some moments where you feel like perhaps there is some dichotomy or some conflicts of interest. So because of that tension, I wanted to see if it's possible to kind of change how that might go in the future, which is why we started this organization called Greater Good Studio, my co-founder and I. We wanted to see if it's possible to have a regular for-profit design business where the act of doing work on a day-to-day basis was always in alignment with our values, and that there's no discrepancy between the portfolio you see online and the work you actually do. And I think sometimes that can feel like that is an equivalence that people have to make compromises around, and we wanted to see if it's possible to make a company that where those compromises wasn't already baked into it. It's actually really hard to make a business like this. We joke sometimes about how if we had called ourselves Incrementally Better Studio, it would have been a piece of cake. That would have been easy. That would be fine. That business, actually, I know how to do that business. But something called Greater Good annoyingly has this aspect to it where we've stated very publicly we want to have things that have contributions to society, and exclusively that. So because of it, we decided how do we sort of be 100% dedicated to the social sector. That means all our time is spent on the social sector projects and all our revenue is spent on social sector income. Just like our clients, we can't afford to have offset our work with a large contract with Pepsi, for instance, because none of our clients have that opportunity either. So we have to kind of be all in like our clients are. And in doing so, one of the challenges has been is how do you make decisions around the projects you take on and how do you stay in business? And counterintuitively, what we've had to do is actually create a rubric. So these are just some of the questions that we wrote for ourselves. But this rubric allows for a rigorous, consistent, almost like an operationalizing our culture through these questions. Because what we found is that unless we have these questions, we can be very, very susceptible to having our feelings be manipulated by the end of quarter results or how we feel that day or whether I had coffee that morning. Like all of these ways in which we can get influenced by our guts means that we kind of had to stabilize things by writing these questions.
And we have Eric in the chat who is sharing his personal story, saying that he got denied by many agencies in interviews because he doesn't want to design for alcohol and smoke-related projects. So he ended working in-house for a company as a designer full-time. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that these examples are making sense because I think that I personally also couldn't work on alcohol projects. Other people don't have those opinions, and that's fine. And I certainly would not presume that this basis is a universal set of principles, but rather the idea is that everybody, I think, has a gut check, but I don't think everybody writes it down. And I think when you write it down, it feels more real, and there's power in that actually, and there's actually, I think, a lot of agency that can be built in yourselves when you write it down and share it with others. Because I think there's other people around you go, oh yeah, I've had those questions. Why don't I write down my ones? And now with my students, I get to work on this and help them develop their gut checks.
So, it's a great practice, like for everyone watching. And you have, you say, a post on Medium maybe where you share this process?
Yeah, my co-founder wrote originally the piece where we describe sort of the origins of the gut check. And at this point right now, it's 45 questions. It takes about half an hour. And it's a shareable link, which actually we can share out to you guys as well.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they will find the link.
Awesome.
Like one of them out and share it in the chat.
And so what we found, you see, is that the projects and who you say yes to certainly will build your portfolio. Like you end up naturally with that collection.
And we're live on Behance, you know, which is the paradise of portfolio.
Of course. So. But what I think becomes rather opaque is that who you say no to builds your power.
Okay.
And I think that criteria of the no is defined by your gut check. And I think the stronger and more robust your gut check becomes, the more power you build for yourself.
And also having the ability to write your gut check and your process is something you can document on you and also review because when did you start your company? It was
2011.
Yeah, so more than 7 years.
Yeah,
so, and you can come back maybe and review also?
Yeah, so what we've done, this is really unfortunate. At the end of last year, we had a team member, a really vital team member leave.
Oh, okay.
And it was, I think, primarily because I screwed up. And there were projects that we took on that we shouldn't have.
Oh,
and it was an awful transition, but also a very clear demonstration that our gut check wasn't working.
Oh.
Because our gut check can only be tested when things go well. If people leave because of the projects, I'm screwing this up. We're screwing up. So we've added 2 new questions since then, which is now why we got to 45.
So you improve your get check process over time.
It's almost like, this is why it's counterintuitive. It's like we're deliberately trying to put ourselves out of business by creating more and more filters in the way of people getting in. And I think what it should mean logically is not only that you make it harder, but anything that gets through should be perfect. And that, I think, is why we do it. Not because we're trying to actively be annoying, because I think it could come across as just being a whiny bunch of people, but rather that what filters through, what finally gets through, should be pure. And I think that's what the pursuit is. How do we find the best clients with the best projects, with the best outcomes and impact that we're looking for? So actually what we've been discovering is that now after about 90 projects for the last 7 years, we've been trying to see if there actually may be some thoughts we've had. And one of the observations, is something a little bit concerning for me, was that there's this recognition of that design, I think as a discipline, has a slightly, lacks a basic understanding of power and privilege, which I think is concerning to me, because the more that we've been doing work in the social sector, the issues that we face and the issues that a lot of the participants that we work with are in contexts that were created by power-based contexts, power-based situations. We'll talk about this later on, but the idea of power asymmetry. And that when you don't understand what power is as a designer, because it's not taught to us in school, what it means is that we end up in these complex power-based contexts, these situations like homelessness or a refugee crisis or whatever it may be, and kind of like fumble our way through it. And there's a risk that we may actually make things worse by throwing Post-it notes and Sharpie markers at these very, very complex issues, when we ourselves don't even realize what power and how power worked to make these contexts real.
And for these like very sensitive topics and having to work with social, we have a question by Mariam. She's asking, but how do you get your clients? Like, do you do any advertisements, or do you have to be active in a specific network maybe?
Yeah, it's really hard, and I don't know if we know exactly all the things that go into it. I mean, I think one thing is just that we've been around now long enough, but it took, if you go back to the very first time, it took one particular client to take a risk on a crazy set of unproven, fools like us. But because we were able to talk about our work in a particular way, that did the translation. Are you familiar with this game called Taboo? There's a game
Taboo. Yeah,
okay,
I love
so
this game.
imagine if you play the game Taboo, but you can't use the word design, innovation, iteration, prototyping, sketching, but like all of those words are like,
and you have to convince.
So you have to then find new terms for those commonly used crutches that we are familiar with in our industry, but nobody else is. Imagine working with clients who have never heard of design, and when you say it, they think logo, or they think sticker, or they think website. If you use those words that automatically trigger certain responses, it's like it's already game over. So you have to learn how to describe your work in simpler, more accurate behavioral terms that doesn't rely on those crutches. It's really hard, actually. So with this lack of understanding, what we realized is that over those last 7 years, we have had some observations on power and privilege that we wanted to get to share, because I think there's a lot of designers who are wanting to do work in the social sector. There's like a huge appetite for this, and in doing so, we thought we should kind of share some of them. The first one being that power asymmetry affects your relationship with clients and the people they serve. So there's a couple of terms in here that we should kind of clarify. So the first one is, what is power? The simplest definition is the ability to affect an outcome. So what that might mean, is a way to make it more tangible, is that if you can reliably make things go your way, that's kind of a measure of how much power you have. And when you find at least 50% of the time things don't go your way, well, then you don't have much power. That's pretty simple. The next term is the idea of power asymmetry. So what we've heard, I think the term is like power dynamics, or like, oh, I'm in a relationship with lots of power dynamics. I think it's very kind of hard to know what it means. I think the word asymmetry has been helpful, because it just means that it's an uneven distribution of power between two parties.
Yeah, and you have a great like graphic representation in the next slide.
So what I've been able to, it's really just a triangle made in Keynote, but there you go. The idea simply is that there's a wide end and a sharp end. But the best way to kind of make it through for you is that if you've ever worked on a project, I'm curious if anybody on the chat has felt this, where you start the project and you already know, I'm never going to make it out alive. Like the project is all, the timeline is off, the budget is all wrong, we're never going to make it. That is you at the end, the sharp end of that power asymmetry. And that there's somebody somewhere on the wide end. So that the asymmetrical distribution of power means that you don't get to control the schedule, the portfolio, the project, whatever it may be, but somebody does. And they are demanding from you certain performance. So that kind of helps you understand, okay, there's a difference here. Now, there's a lot of relationships that have that, in fact, many relationships, and there are a bunch here. So law enforcement with detainees, doctors and patients, pretty much all employers and their employees, funders and grantees for sure, teachers and students, local government, leadership with their frontline staff. I mean, anybody who's kind of a big deal in their organization and let's say the person who works in the reception, immediately that's an obvious sense of power asymmetry. Now, what's funny though is that for us, and I think a lot of designers might feel this, we were started as a business to try and see if we can help those on the sharp end of that asymmetry. But we keep getting hired by those on the wide end.
Yeah. Like
because
you took to the one on the left.
Yeah, like a lot of the funders, local government, they tend to be on this far left side, which means that us as a studio, we end up here. We end up actually further along the asymmetric wide end than I think we originally thought.
And this is something like for your studio, but I think that you could replace this by designers in general, you know? This could
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that that's something that gets a little lost because we don't teach about design, because we don't talk about design in design school. You may not realize that actually the structure of design school in many ways, and actually you as a student, ends up with you gathering an enormous amount of power as a creator. So many fields of I think, productive work have you executing things. Very few allow you to create new, which is the magical, amazing thing we get to do as designers. And as someone who has the ability to spontaneously make new ideas happen, that is a powerful position. But as it relates to this diagram, I think we may not realize sometimes that when we do work in the social sector, we get hired by those who have more power than us. In order to affect those on the sharp end, we actually may be making things worse. It's a double-edged sword in that we, in our effort to maybe help out, there's a.
You have an example where, you know?
Yeah, I think that this has happened a couple of times. So there was this feels like an example that gets beat up a lot, but the One Laptop Per Child is a project that was renowned for its remarkable use of technology in a very compact, durable case. But the idea that this $300, maybe $400 piece of technology that might cost $1,000 just to distribute and get into the different countries within Africa, and then get given to a young child, where in a classroom setting where there may not even be pencils, seems like there's a clear disconnect to the reality of those lived experiences, and yet the urgency and desire to help. So there's probably some designer who helped design that laptop, funded by large NGOs or government international development agencies, wanting to help those on the right-hand side, on the sharp end, and may realize you may be exacerbating things. Perhaps the funding that went into your project and the development of that technology could have just been given directly to community.
To invest in schools and,
And in doing so, perhaps then that designer loses the project. I'm okay with that. But the question should be, where is the best use of this impact and where could it come from? Perhaps it comes from community. And in cases like us, we have to therefore be very careful, again with that gut check, is it appropriate for us to do this project? It's a very difficult question to ask. And it's an awful one we have to ask ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
So the second observation, design and innovation culture is steeped in privilege. So this is the one that I've been a little unsure about mentioning out loud.
Okay.
Partly because I think my own privileges start to be exposed. And it's the kind of thing whereby when I talk about privilege, I think people start like getting a little white-knuckled. In some,
it's have a negative perception. That's what you mean? Like when we use the word privilege, it's perceived as something.
I think what's happened these days is that the word privilege has become somewhat weaponized. It's almost become a source of guilt for a lot of people. And I think it's not true that some people have and some people don't, but I think everybody has a certain degree. And I wanted to offer like a different definition for it. I think I would treat it like it's a gift.
Okay, which is positive.
Positive, but it's a gift that you did nothing to earn.
Okay.
And I think when you describe it like that, you realize, oh, I get this thing, but because it's a gift you did nothing to earn, you don't even know it's there. You may not even know its presence until someone without that privilege goes, wait a second, how did you get away with that? How would you get one of those? I wish I had one of those. And it's the kind of thing where you've been in, I'm sure you've seen this, where someone with more privilege will say exactly the same phrase you just did, in just the right way, and then suddenly everybody listened to that voice, but not yours. You go, wait a second.
Like charisma.
I just told you that. I said that in an email last week and nobody listened. That's privilege working. And it's noticeable when you don't have it. But for those who do have it, I don't want to make them feel bad, but I do want them to call out the fact, yeah, you have it. And I think it's powerful to recognize that its presence is there.
Yeah.
I wanted to also recognize, because here's the thing, I don't know if you can tell, but because I have a British accent, I grew up in England, I get given affordances for what I'm saying that I didn't have when I was in England. You could argue that perhaps I didn't know as much then, and that's probably true, but having this accent in this context completely changes.
In the US.
In the US. So there's a privilege that's attached to that. And I think the reason I bring it up is that even though there are examples now, thankfully, of this movie, Crazy Rich Asians, where you're starting to change the narrative around what people expect of Asian people, I think the predominant norm is still to have this rather destructive narrative.
Yeah, a lot of cliche caricatures.
Yeah.
Not only in the US, like I could speak
globally
to friends, like it's the same. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a strong, powerful image that persists of having a subordinate and inadequacies. And I think then what it makes me realize is that if I'm having this message, they very well be maybe another Asian person in England shouting to a black hole the same message that I have. So I'm very lucky to have this platform today to be able to say these words, because there's probably somebody else whose spot I could be taking right now, just from these privileges that I happen to have.
Yeah, that's interesting. I should analyze if my French accent is privilege in the US or not. Like,
it's cool, man. It's definitely a thing.
Must be some,
it's definitely a thing.
There must be some benefits there.
So here's some phrases that, again, because of the design and technology culture that we're in, these phrases like ask for forgiveness, lean in, move fast and break things, or go big or go home, they are, I think, strong terms that are usually meant to be encouraging, as in like, I want you to be more innovative.
Yeah,
I want you to take more risks.
Yeah.
And I think within...
And actually we have a very nice comment from Ashton. Ashton, who works in social justice advocacy, who had this conversation all the time, but the reason I'm not working as a designer is because the problems he's outlining. So, so cool that you are addressing these issues. So yeah, Ashton, hopefully this will be inspiring, because you will see in this presentation that not only George is addressing the issues, but also he would encourage all of you to how to face these issues and find solutions.
These comments are hilarious. Michael sounds so smart too. Brilliant. See,
yeah,
I'm telling you,
it's a first. Thanks to you.
We are getting away with so many things.
That's your
so
power,
things.
to make me sound smart.
So what's the reason I bring up these phrases is that it's conveniently often offered as advice, as career advice.
Yeah, like go big or go home.
Sure.
I just had it on Slack like 1 week ago.
There you go.
We were just making fun of this.
Conveniently enough, it's usually uttered as advice by those who have enough privilege to afford the risk that this purports to have. As in, if I can risk my whole career, because basically nothing's going to happen to me, it's fine. But there are some, you see, and this is the next point, since privilege is not evenly distributed, not everybody can take the same risk. And it means that there are those, perhaps more likely in the US, people of color, who may be seen as not being as innovative enough, okay, or like thinking outside the box enough.
And in trying hard enough.
Trying hard enough.
Because from our standpoint, maybe they say we were like, oh, why don't you take the risk?
Yeah.
And actually, they can't. Like,
right.
Because for them, it's a huge risk.
And I think what's maybe gets a little lost in the mix is that showing up as a person of color in any workplace, particularly white workplaces, is that there's already enormous risk being there on a daily basis. They're already actually at max capacity. And to ask more of that person may be too much, but it will be read, and perhaps again in those annual review, will be read as well, this person isn't really part of our team. It can be a very subtle way of actually limiting career progression without recognizing that privilege, the asymmetric, that sort of the unevenness of privilege. You're kind of reading only the tops, the sort of above the radar, without recognizing all of the activity happening below the radar, just to show up. So that stuff gets kind of real, and
that's awesome.
Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So here's the last observation. Access to power and privilege shapes your lived experience. And what we found, you see, is that when you have access to power and privilege, you may not kind of conceptualize of the world being any different than the one you have. And also for those who don't have power and privilege, the world feels very, very different. So I wanted to almost show like this comparison. For those who have power and privilege on the left-hand side and those who do not on the right-hand side, I want to show how 4 different aspects of living in America can play out.
Okay.
So when you have the concept of time, which everybody has, everyone has access to the same amount.
It's worldwide.
Funnily enough,
we all have 24 hours per day.
Time has an expansive quality. It kind of like feels, and I think it's based on the idea that when you have power, you can make things happen the way you want them to. And when you reliably have had that happen throughout your life, you start planning ahead and further ahead and further ahead. There are people working actively, I think, at the Koch brothers level, okay, the Koch brothers, who are pouring millions of dollars into political campaigns to ensure certain outcomes for their for their kind and for their other 1%, generationally into the future. They are trying their very best to assert the power they have, and they have tons of it. Now, for those who do not have access to power and privilege, there's a compression aspect to how time works. Because you reliably can't make things happen your way, you learn to discount the future. Yeah. Because why plan for having a master's degree when at the end of the month you may not be sure if you have your rent? Yeah. Or at the end of the week your cell phone bill may not get paid, or at the end of the day maybe your kid gets sick.
It's living day to day, but...
and I think that compressive quality of time is hard for people to conceptualize, because if you've lived in one time version, how could you imagine anyone living in the other? So then if you compare with the other things, so mistakes, again, is a universal human behavior. Everybody has them. For those with power and privilege, they get seen as a learning opportunity. It's like folded into your career as being something, well, this is an opportunity for us to like learn from, and let's just try the next time.
Yeah. You can fail, you will learn from it.
It's going to be great. Like we have you, there are so many safety nets. On the other hand, though, for those without power and privilege, that same mistake might get seen as an inherent flaw, like some sort of like character deficit. Or worse, sometimes it gets, well, this is what your group of people do. It's very damaging, because it assumes that there are irrevocable change that's happening, and therefore it isn't worthy our compassion and our need to improve. Very different. Now, this is another issue. This is happening all around the world. People are migrating for numerous reasons. And for those who are with power and privilege, that term of migration gets treated very differently. It gets called an expat. Yeah. There are lots and lots of British expats all over Europe.
For France, like it's perceived as something else.
Yeah.
Oh, an expat.
It's almost like exclusively a white term. I don't know why. I noticed there was an article in The Guardian that mentioned this, how it seems like it's only for those that have a certain profile. Yeah. Now for the others.
From Europe, if you...
Yes.
It's migration from Europe to other continents, then you're an expat.
And that term basically carries certain weight. But if you are a migrant in another setting, you get given terms like immigrant or refugee. Similarly, you might be leaving for some rationale. You may be looking for work. But those types of terms of expat versus refugee get treated very differently in the world. And the government response and the response of the society around us also is incredibly different. Yeah. And then lastly, so something as large as a national crisis. So here in the US, there's a large national crisis around something called the opioid epidemic. And that term is a convenient method of describing a phenomenon of a lot of people suffering from addiction to opioid-based chemicals, either because it was prescribed to them or because they've been able to access it on the street. But the phenomena is called the opioid epidemic, and it has produced a compassionate response across the country to say, this is out of these groups of people's hands. It deserves a humanitarian response, as in like, don't blame them. It's not their fault.
It's an epidemic.
Like we should help. Yeah. Conveniently enough, though, those same chemicals have been used for years by different groups of people in the United States with those who have less power and access to power and privilege. And that same phenomena gets treated very differently because it gets called the war on drugs. There are millions of people involved in the criminal justice system who are fueling all sorts of other sort of corrupt, perverse incentives. But those phenomena of being at the whim of addiction gets treated so differently, and the sort of court response has been through a brutal expansion of militarization of the police force. Whereas on the left-hand side, it gets treated as being let's work out how do we provide community health workers to make sure that there's a healthcare response. Same chemicals, very different people, and therefore very different responses. It's almost as though we've managed to take being poor and gentrified it.
And Andy is making a very good point, saying like the words we use are so critical to seeing the truth of operation. And you see the power of words also, and the power of copy.
And I think because of it, there are those who have significant power who will latch on to certain narratives that are convenient for them because of their other agenda. And I think that we may, as designers, not be aware of the context in which we're playing in, because the power of some words as it turns into policy, become very, very impactful. So what we find, you see, is this phrase.
You see fireworks?
Ah!
Yep.
It's time.
Okay, it's time. So, okay, let's see if they know what to do. Oh, I think they know. So we will play a short video and I will explain what's going on. Yeah, diversity everywhere, because today's theme is diversity and inclusion in design, and that's why we address with George like this very sensitive topics about privilege and power, and to reward you because you are also into this topic today, watching us and getting sensitive about all these topics. We want to reward you, and you say diversity in the chat. We will run a script, select someone, and you will receive a notebook, beautiful notebook produced by Moo.com, who is our partner this week. So it's just to reward you because you take time to watch, you take time to engage with us, to interact, make very valid statements in the chat, asking great questions. So thank you for this. Thanks for watching from all around the world. Like, this is really awesome. And here we go. So who will receive the notebook? This is Daniel Ferreira de Queiroz. I tried to pronounce it.
That was pretty smooth.
I am in my best. So Daniel, you will receive a private message on Behance. If you didn't win, stay tuned. We will do another giveaway, another chat and win in about 1 hour. In the next show, we will be live with Megan.
He's like, cool.
Yeah, cool. Daniel, yeah, good job. So this quote.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we found that this amazing quote from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, who we've done some work with, they certainly recognize that there is agency and autonomy and a sort of recognition of self-responsibility. But what we find to be more true is that the choices we make depend on the choices we have. There's a certain set or pool that the context you're in affords you. And depending on how much access to power and privilege, that pool can be a lot or it can be incredibly narrow. And I think for those who have power and privilege, when they are trying to help those with less power, they actually miss out on the fact that the choices are already predetermined. It makes it very challenging. And I think that it gets read as being, well, we have to save this group of people. And I think that there is a high risk of paternalism and all the issues that come with it in that way. So how should we respond? This is sort of a question.
Like also, when you're challenged, or people saying like you need to think outside of the box.
Yes.
We don't have the same box.
Yeah.
We don't perceive the same box.
And this box was set a decade ago before me, so thanks for your advice, but I'm in this box.
I'm in this small box, you're maybe in the bigger one.
Right.
You asked me to think out of it, but we don't have the same box. Yeah.
Exactly. So in previous talks that I've given, they ended kind of abruptly there in a very sort of sad mic drop, and I walk away. It's just really depressing, actually.
Thank you.
And
That's
I'm
all
done.
from me.
But we realized that, hey, we have to come back with something that's a little more hopeful. So we took inspiration for what to do next, actually from an amazing design team that's based out of Cincinnati called Design Impact. We love these guys so much. They are, I think, probably the closest group of people that we've seen to us. But Design Impact is a Cincinnati-based design organization that understands power intimately. The two co-founders, one was a social worker, the other a designer, baked into their core, like so much cooler than us. Baked into their core was an understanding around how power and design works. So I thought we took a lot of inspiration from them. And what they did. And
the co-founder of your studio, what was she doing?
She's a design researcher. So
research.
Yeah, she's a researcher. But we were both in the commercial design industry. But with Design Impact, they did something really cool, which was they took a look across all their projects. Every project that has themes, and then say, what are the themes from all the themes?
The meta.
So they call it meta themes. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know you could do that. It was so mind-blowing. It's like, you could do that? That's so cool. So we said, can we do that? Can we take a look across all our work? And what we found is that there may be this future framework that we have for our studio and possibly the field that I think we're trying to grow. And the framework looks like this. It starts with this phrase, good design does blank. So it goes, good design honors reality.
Okay.
Good design creates ownership. Mm-hmm. Good design builds power.
Okay.
Now, for designers, I think that these terms may sound kind of new, but for many people,
this is not something you learn at school.
Yeah, you mostly hear like good design is efficient. Good design is simple.
Yeah, simple. Yeah.
And the Dieter Rams 10 principles are a canon. No one's arguing with that. But if the world of design stayed working on complex business problems, I would argue that the 10 principles that Dieter Rams established work perfectly well. There's no need for any addition.
Okay.
But in the world of where the designers are starting to enter complex social issues, I think we needed to see a new framework, a new set of rules. And this is our offer. And the reason I say that perhaps it seems new is because designers don't understand and have this training around power, but many other fields that we will bump into do. There are other fields that we work alongside, like anthropology, social work, and organizing. Those fields are the places where we are starting to show up. And without that understanding around power, we may be showing up rather awkwardly. So in a way, we're saying that good design is anthropology. Good design is social work, and good design is organizing. It's taking reference from something very old. And we take a lot of, we actually find it quite comforting to know that other people have done this work before, and that perhaps through our design work, we might be able to make a contribution, but not have to start from scratch.
It's almost what creates a healthy civilization, I like to say. See what I mean?
Yeah, because I think if you do those three things, your objectives around how you complete design changes. Yeah. Your insistence on getting the kerning right seems to seem at a different level now than it did before. My obsession with type as a young designer was like, this is the end all and be all of my career. Now I'm realizing maybe there are other things. Maybe we have to work about who's in the room figuring out what the copy is, let alone what the kerning looks like. Not to make it trivial, but just there are a completely new set of questions that start to come up. So when we think about projects that have honoring reality, we start to think about how perhaps in our design work, I think we do this fairly well.
Yes.
Because we do so much anthropology or sort of anthropological work where we're facing reality with our participants. This example here is with the Hennepin County Medical Center. It's a hospital complex out in Minneapolis. They do amazing work, but they were looking for how to design new models of care for complex patients. These are individuals that have multiple conditions at the same time. So there may be issues around substance use, mental illness, and a chronic condition. It makes them near impossible to treat in a regular way. So what we found was that when you have this type of work, there may be typical responses from healthcare. For instance, someone may say, well, I got a prescription. This is something we found with our research. One of our participants said, I just got a prescription to go soak in a tub to treat my back and to treat some of my illnesses. And then she says to us on the bus as we're riding home, I don't have a bath, I only have a shower. That's the apartment that I have. So this prescription and the time it took to get to this doctor's appointment was a complete waste of my time.
Oh.
Because
it wasn't considering the environment of the patient.
And actually there's a phrase that describes this whole type of work that precedes us for a long stretch. It's called the social determinants of health. There is a growing understanding within healthcare, but also within the funder industry, discipline, the funders in general, the network of the social determinants of blank. That there are all these other factors that affect the thing you've been working on, and you could almost describe all our projects as being the social determinants of blank. But in this case, it's around healthcare. And one thing that we ended up noticing was that even when we were trying to test an idea that had phone calls coming from the hospital to reach out to patients at home, what we kept noticing was that nobody answered the phone. This was like a test to find out whether or not we could do a
pre-screen. Can we engage with
beforehand? And because nobody answered the phone, we thought, wait, why is this happening? All 10 calls kept going to nothing. We kept going to voicemail. I thought, that's weird. And we suspect it's because the hospital, well, we think the hospital's billing department is associated with that phone number. So our suspicion...
it's a call, so I have to pay the bill.
Yeah, so it's hell no, I'm not touching that. I'm not picking up that phone. So we said, why don't we try it? Let's hack this and said, let's just go get a new phone with a completely disassociated number. And then we were able to find out, people are starting to pick up again. So we were finding the hard way to the reality of those lived experiences as a way for us to learn as an agency, but also to help our clients understand the lived reality for a lot of our participants. Secondly, so this is something around good design creates ownership. I'd argue that this one is something we don't do as well. The first one I think we have a pretty good handle on. This one we're still learning how to do.
Okay.
How to transfer ownership.
So ownership to the final user in this case?
Somebody.
Just to somebody. Okay.
Well, I think this actually brings up an interesting tension.
So not to the customer, or?
It kind of depends. So sometimes it's to our clients who are the heads of an organization, like a nonprofit. But
so
in
you
many
empower
cases,
them. Okay, yeah, makes sense.
in many cases, also the end beneficiary. But what's bringing up in tension, this is why it's interesting, I think, to bring up here, is that designers are obsessed with ownership. I think designers are trained to fetishize, this is my work.
Okay.
And what it means
as a designer, yeah.
Yeah, and
okay.
I think it's sort of like it's
my property, yeah.
Exactly. If anything, it's almost like my value is to be the person that made this. And in the design what we've done, we can't own it. If we do, we've basically dropped the adoption rate to less than 50% every time. So we have to design work that is therefore owned and implemented by our clients and the people that they serve, which means we have to let go of much of the ownership and actually design the transfer. That's really hard, and it kind of brings a lot of conflict in us. So this is an interesting project we did across the US. This is for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it's called Raising Places. It's called raisingplaces.org. It's I think it's been a fantastic combination of teaching design to communities, but also building power within those communities. It's specifically trying to create child-centered communities. And what that means is a community, and this is an example here, this is the design team that was brought out from the community. This is in Montana, so this is a tribal community, where they were essentially defining for themselves who gets to be in the room. And again, it's not appropriate for Greater Good Studio in Chicago to be determining who's in the room. It should be a community. Who should be in the room, and then what are the issues we want to face? And then what are the solutions we want to make? All of that creation and ownership will allow for a new kind of idea, a new kind of adoption, new kinds of implementation that I think is inherently missing if it was just designers from Chicago doing a remote project. And our thesis is that it's going to be different. It's going to be better. That's what we think. So how do you create spaces for community?
And Andy is asking, this way of owning design, do you feel like that brings it more into the realm of art for many designers rather than consulting?
That's interesting. I hadn't considered art to be necessarily the place it would go to.
It's a question too.
Yeah.
It's really something that you hear in the design community.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, the word we would use is about building capacity. Capacity is a term that I wasn't familiar with as a designer prior to working in the social sector, but the social sector is obsessed with this term. It basically means how do you allow for someone to grow? And building capacity.
Empowerment. A new skill.
But what's worth noting is that there are many communities that we got to work in, but I think this is true of communities across the country, where previous contributions to some sort of large change goes into a black hole. And that community engagement is often just the idea of you get to hear this before everybody else, but whatever you say isn't going to change anything because the plan's already baked.
It's really one way. Community engagement in a lot of projects.
It's pretty bad. So essentially the trauma of past public engagement is a hole that we didn't put ourselves into, but we knew we were already in.
Deal with it.
We had to climb our way out of it. And if we didn't recognize that, which I think a lot of designers don't recognize, you may end up in spaces like this wondering, why is everybody upset with me? I'm here to help. Why is everybody already shouting at me? I didn't do anything. And you kind of lose this disconnect between, well, it's not my fault, I get that, but it's also the fault of people like you who have been working in a community before. And then lastly, this idea like good design builds power, I think it's something that is nearly impossible for us to do. I wanted to recognize this because I showed this presentation one time to an organizer, and he goes, yeah, that's cute. That's not what you're doing. It's like, you can try, but like, you're not doing that. So, oh, Jesus. So I said, okay, fine. Let me dial it back a little. We are trying to build power, and I think it may be the hardest thing we do. Because if anybody who's tried organizing, it means a lot of people have to be aligned around an idea. So in this case, what we're trying to do was build power for tenants. So I don't know if anybody on the chat here is a renter, but if you are a renter, your relationship with your landlord will really determine whether or not your experience living in that apartment is something you want to do long term or something you want to get out of immediately. And what we found was that by working with the Metropolitan Tenants Organization is that there are great landlords, there are great tenants, but what's shared amongst them both, the behavior is long-term relationships. They treat the relationship long-term, not transactionally. So that's good. That's something that we were happy to see. What we also saw, though, is there's a lot of wayward landlords mistreating their tenants, as I'm sure many of you know. But in that case, the MTO ends up doing a call center and describing for them the same message, which is please take a photo of what you saw or what's happening, and then write it down. So
there was a pattern now.
So what we did was we said, okay, can we make a web app that does that so that it takes stress off the call center, which is ran by volunteers, only certain hours. So if a web app is doing this automatically in the background, you can report these issues all day long. Hopefully not too many, but if you do, it's recorded. And then also the app works as a way to help you codify all the different things that are happening potentially in your apartment. So you have a record that can be used perhaps in court to describe what is happening, and it's not now a series of text messages that disappear into the ether, but rather a
and that you can
transcript,
in court,
a transcript. Like, here are all the attempts that I made. Here's the photo of the leak that's happening in our roof.
That's a leak.
And you can do it from your phone. And then here's the issue, and it gets sent by the app to the landlord, not from your personal phone. So the landlord is treating it differently.
It's not
because the language and the how it reads is, oh, this is official, I have to do something about this. Okay, which usually works.
And there is a third part. It's not only you and the landlord now. There is some.
Yeah, there's like a third party. So what can happen though is, unfortunately, not everything gets taken care of. Is that you may end up having to report an issue that gets escalated, as in like it's still not getting fixed. So I need to escalate it, and there are a number of different choices you have as a tenant. This is something more in Illinois than I would say is probably across the US. I don't know if every state has this, but there is legislature that's allowing a tenant to be able to self-remedy their situation and actually either stop paying rent
until it's fixed.
Until it's fixed, or use their rent to go and get a contractor to get it contracted. To go get it fixed, which is something that you may not know as a tenant, but may not feel like
it's good for the landlord too. It's like investing in the property too, but I guess it would be hard to convince them.
So this is the thing. When I mentioned this to my organizer friend, they said, hey, are we not building power? He goes, yeah, you kind of are, but here's the thing. There are still landlords that will say, fine, sue me, because I will report you to ICE. And then as an undocumented immigrant, you're going to get towed away. So do whatever you like. That's not the same.
Apparently we can do it in California too.
That is awesome. Kathleen, thank you for that.
Cool.
She says not a lawyer in quotes, by the way. That's awesome. Good catch. But what's interesting is that it's true. We aren't fixing and building power to a degree whereby tenants can make those demands without implication. There will often still situations where landlords will be able to say, I'm going to pull rank on you and say, call me out if you wish. I'm going to report you. But in many cases, this app and has been changing, I think, that power asymmetry that's often found. So with this framework, we're offering a new way, I think, of describing design, not universally, because I think, like I said, Dieter Rams' principles have worked and continue to work perfectly well. But in the social sector, as it's becoming a growing field for designers to enter, I think there needs to be new terminology, new frameworks. Because I think if we simply borrow the principles from one type of design in business and copy-paste them into the social sector, it's not going to be enough. And I think a lot of our social sector clients will know and feel it, but can't tell you why. So this is what we offer as a way to kind of get through this work.
No, that's great. And I think like even beyond like the social sector, just having us designer challenging how we define design and just say, oh, design is less, or less is more. Just thinking beyond that and the impact you can have on the users in general, the relationships between the customers, yourself, the users. I think it's just great practice to make a better world with designers, like in a way. Which is something that I see every week in the chat saying, we don't, people don't recognize enough the value of design. But I think this is a great way to add value to what design can do and what we can do.
I think a lot of people have a certain impression of what design is capable of. And I think for us, we were trying to see if you can reset those expectations. Because I got to work at a phenomenal global design agency, and my mind was blown daily of like, I didn't know you could do that. That's amazing. And to think that that could be continued into the social sector, for us was very attractive because, well, what else could we do with this? And what we're finding actually is that, this is a funny observation, we're starting to feel like the word human-centered design, which is what we practice, is actually starting to chafe a little. It's starting to become inaccurate to the work that we're doing because it's going beyond that now into areas that actually don't look like design anymore. In some cases, it's about teaching design, it's about building up capacity, it's doing facilitation, it's about making sure that people get heard. So we're designing, in some cases, who should be in the room and then leaving it. That doesn't look like kerning to me. That doesn't look like, I'm not using InDesign for those types of things. We might use InDesign to design the invite to the event, but there you go. the design work that we're doing now has gone a little in places we weren't expecting. And I'm realizing because of its unchartedness, it feels scary because there isn't names for it. So we're saying, ooh, there's an analogy we make, which is that it's a little bit like when an immigrant leaves the mainland and they end up finding another little island somewhere. You can decide what traditions to keep and what new traditions to start. Yeah. And for me, I left IDEO, so I have so many great foundational practices that I have from that company and the world of human-centered design. But I also know that I don't have to carry every tradition. So in this case, we're starting to create perhaps some new ones. But I still feel a lot of loyalty and a lot of gratitude from that foundation because that's where I got mine from.
Oh, this is great. I mean, thanks for sharing of your thoughts, your journey. Also, you were proposing to share this presentation, so we will
yes,
add
absolutely.
it in the description of the YouTube video, probably at the end of this week. We have like 3 minutes left together. I really want you to tease the project you have been working on this weekend.
Yeah.
And just chatting with George before the show, like we even have more ideas to make it bigger. But we want to share it with you because it's such a great idea.
So this is brand new. We just completed this on Saturday. This is a simple idea. It's called Portraits of Color. That's it. But the observation comes from our work, which is that people of color face significant challenges in their career progression or even getting started in careers for many reasons. And we can't fix all of those, and certainly that's not our duty to do so. But there is one very simple thing, which is having a good high-quality photograph for a headshot for your LinkedIn profile might be surprisingly a barrier that is stymies progression. A lot of people of color, I think, sometimes even goes to the degree where they refuse to put a photo up because they have seen evidence of their photo, meaning that their application is now ended. So having high quality photographs for people of color is a phenomenon.
It makes a huge difference.
So we thought, I'm pretty handy with a camera. Can we offer a way of having free photography, free high quality headshots, and specifically learning how to treat dark skin differently, because when you light dark skin differently, you end up with better photographs. And I think for a lot of photography as a culture, but also as a technology, it's actually skews towards light skins. I mean, there's phenomena of this, okay? This is a terrible piece of history, but I remember hearing that film manufacturers didn't even know to have dark skin treated in their chemistry until photographers started photographing furniture.
Wow, okay.
Do you know how messed up that is?
That's messed up.
So historically, film and then photography has been very skewed to one direction. Okay. So we said, can we offer this? So we did this, we offered it, we put an announcement on LinkedIn and Facebook. In 12 hours, all 50 spots filled. We ended up with a 100-person wait list, and we said, oh, we got to do this again. We did it in Chicago on Saturday. And through partnership with AIGA and the rental agency, we were also offering hair and makeup that day, which was really fun, and also LinkedIn resume rebuild, so kind of reviewing all of your writing.
That's great.
So I want to show you some of these photos.
Let's look at some pictures.
These are the photos that I photographed on Saturday. And these remarkable individuals came in that day and just said, hey, can I get a headshot? Some of them are actors, some of them are podiatrists, some of them run non-profit foundations. Okay. This lady came in with her dad because she didn't know what to happen.
Just in case.
This lady runs a non-profit that does spinal injuries, and she runs that organization herself. I don't know what this lady does.
Wow, she looks great.
All of these individuals, I think, are remarkable, beautiful people. And we found that in just even having the photographs taken, they said, I never see myself like this.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I think that there's a phenomena of
it builds confidence.
Yeah, I just think that there's a phenomena where if you don't see enough visual examples of people that look like you, there are cases where you start to wonder, is it me? Am I not beautiful? Am I not worthy of this attention?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that is sad. And I wanted to see if it was possible to kind of change that. So we've now done it once. I'm going to do a write-up of how to do this, and I would like this to become a very portable idea. I'd love to see portraits of color happen all over the city, all over wherever. It can't be bound by me.
We have some ideas.
And I think there may be places where we can get this out there, because I think more high-quality photographs of people of color.
You can ask the chat, like, what would you think about live streaming one of this shooting? You know?
I would love that. I would love that, because I think if there's a way
to see that on Adobe Live, that would
to do a tutorial or how to photograph, because I think the lighting is tricky. It's not obvious. There was this really funny thing where the one white individual that came, she was lovely. when she came in and had her photographs taken, I realized, oh my God, I've overexposed her completely. So I had to like dial everything back for her and then go back to shooting everybody off color again. So there's like, there are actual tangible differences in how the lighting has to be treated.
So like do it live, do it live.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get to do this
find a way.
one day.
We'll find a
But this was a very recent project, and I think it's the kind of thing that we trying to find new ways to do as well.
Well, time's up, George.
Oh man, that was
Thank
great.
you
That
so
went
much.
by so fast.
Yeah, it was really great, and yeah, I'm so happy like for all of you like joining this live show. You shared so amazing like feedback in the chat.
Awesome.
So yeah, let's keep in touch because I really like this project, and we'll just brainstorm and find ways to make it bigger, promote it. I think it's awesome.
Wonderful.
So,
thank you so much for having me here.
yes, I mean that was really great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, everyone, stay tuned. We will be back in about 4 minutes, okay, with Megan. She will be working, designing in XD. She works for Countable, which is an amazing, you will see, initiative, and she will design a new service live with us using Adobe XD, and it will be hosted by Sarah. So see you in a few minutes on Adobe Live. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.